shelter of life, we must reclaim it.
Hey everybody, I'm Kathryn Whitaker. I live here in Texas with my husband and my 6 kids. We have, our oldest is 18 and our youngest is 4. And I just want to share a little bit. You can't have that many babies and not have a story about how they all came about. And so I'd like to share a little bit of our story with you. So Scott and I got married in 1996. When we were dating, I was not Catholic. And then about an hour before our rehearsal dinner, I was confirmed in the Catholic Church, a little non-traditional entrance into the church. But part of our preparation for marriage was attending a pre-Cana, which was sort of like a day-long introduction to church teachings, marriage, communication, all those sorts of things. And so we had a speaker who talked about NFP. And it was not a positive experience, we'll just say it that way. In fact, I left there and I looked at Scott and I said, how dare a celibate priest tell me what to do in my own bedroom with my husband. So I would say that we started out our marriage pretty rocky, at least, and the understanding of what that really meant for our marriage. And so we used artificial contraception for almost 5 years those first 5 years that we were married. And I would say that most of our arguments, aside from the kind of little things that just people argue about, most of our arguments were about sex and the introduction of babies and when the best time was and that sort of thing. And it was just this constant argument, this constant rift in our marriage. And after a while, it just got old. In the meantime, in those first 5 years, we finished our graduate degrees, and then we moved to another state. And while we were there, we became part of the pre-Cana team. And there was this beautiful couple. They had 4 children, and they lovingly shared their witness about NFP. It was the first time that I had ever heard anyone talk about natural family planning and talk about it in a personal, positive, real way. They were very honest about the struggles, but they were also really honest about the joys. It took us 3 times of hearing that talk before Scott and I finally decided to make the leap and try NFP. After each time we would hear them talk, we would come home and we would have this discussion, and it just really opened our hearts. I attribute much of our family's openness to life to Mike and Denise. So fast forward a few years, we had our first baby, Will, and after he was born, we decided to start practicing NFP. About a year later, I miscarried, and so I felt very angry with God, and sort of like maybe it felt like a punishment, like, well, you didn't practice NFP, which I know now is not true, but in the moment, that's what I felt like. We had lots more babies. We were able to kind of reconcile, kind of wrap our arms around that loss, and also just to lovingly embrace and be open to each child. It doesn't mean that it was easy. As a matter of fact, after my second baby, I was ready to call it quits. He was such a colicky, hard baby. And then our 5th baby rolled around, and he was born premature. There's a whole long story with Luke, but those first few years after Luke was born were filled with surgeries and therapy appointments and all sorts of stuff. And I found myself really hesitant to be intimate with Scott because of everything that had happened with Luke. I was nervous and I didn't trust my body. I didn't trust church teachings. And even though we never did artificially contracept, we certainly struggled. That was a massive cross that we carried those first few years after Luke was born. And we had a lot of people tell us, I sure hope this is your last baby. It was really difficult, his birth and the months and years that followed. But I don't know, there was a part of my heart that was at unrest. I just we couldn't find peace. And it wasn't just me, it was Scott too, my husband. But we really decided to put it to prayer. And when I say put it to prayer, I'm talking like 4 years of prayer. We wanted to be really sure that if God was calling us to have more babies, that it wasn't because we felt pressured by what other Catholic families were doing, or even any family, that we were really clear on what our role was as parents, what we could give honestly to the children that we did have, because we had 5 children. Could we give and could we love another baby the way that God was asking us to? We needed to make sure of a lot of things. We definitely had grave reason to not have children, considering the financial stress, the emotional stress. I was diagnosed with PTSD after Luke was born because of our experience in the neonatal intensive care unit. And so we had a lot of things to process. So if you're in a place where you feel like you really need to pray and discern, it's okay. It took us a long time. And after visiting with specialists about could what happened to Luke happen to more babies, Scott and I spending a lot of time in prayer and a lot of time in the Adoration Chapel and just a lot of time with our kids. And while they didn't make the decision, they certainly were a big part of that, and knowing that they were open to loving another sibling. That even though we had all kind of lived through the craziness of a NICU stay and the things that followed, could we do it again? And so we called Gianna our leap of faith baby. And Gianna's birth experience was truly, without a doubt, the most spiritually intense experience that I've ever had in my life. And I believe it was because we were so open to what God wanted for our family. And every family is different. I always tell people, God called us to have 6 kids. He may not be calling you to have 6 kids. Maybe he's asking you to have 2, or maybe he's asking you to have 10, or maybe you're infertile and he's asking you to adopt. I don't know your story, but I know that when you ask God to be a part of your story, the ending and how you live it is really beautiful. So I hope that through being open, and when I say open, that doesn't mean that it's easy. Excuse me. I believe that it means that you are really committed to saying, here I am, Lord. What is it that you want from me? Because the beautiful part about being open to God's plans for you is that he doesn't want you to make a choice and then suffer in the name of his love. He wants you to make a choice to draw you closer to him. And while sometimes that involves temporal suffering, I believe that the suffering is outweighed by the massive amounts of grace and mercy and joy that he pours into your marriage, that he pours into your family, and that he pours into your own personal spirituality. I know for Scott and I, it strengthened our marriage, even though we had some hard moments, really, really hard moments. And I believe that they were worth it. So I hope and pray that as you discern your own family size, that you're open to what it is God wants you to do.